The scream that tore through the Kansas night sent every ranch hand within earshot scrambling for their rifles. But by the time they reached the Henderson homestead, there was nothing left but smoke and silence. Beatrice Henderson stood in the yard, her white nightgown streaked with ash, staring at the burning remains of what had been her family's home just hours before. Her father lay dead inside, along with her stepmother and 2 young stepbrothers. The raiders had come fast and brutal, their faces covered, their intentions clear. They wanted the land deed, the one her father had refused to sell to the railroad company for the past 3 years. Now he would never sell it to anyone. She was 19 years old and utterly alone. The marshal took her statement at dawn, his weathered face creased with sympathy, but offering little in the way of hope. These kinds of raids were happening more frequently across Kansas in the spring of 1875. Especially around Ellsworth, where the railroad was pushing westward with relentless determination. Men with money and power rarely faced consequences for what their hired guns did in the dark. "You got kin somewhere, Miss Henderson?" the marshal asked, tucking his notebook into his vest pocket. Beatrice shook her head. Her mother had died when she was 12, and her father had remarried a widow from Missouri. That woman's family wanted nothing to do with her now. No one. "The church will help you find a situation," he said, meaning work as a domestic servant or perhaps a mail-order bride arrangement. "You cannot stay out here alone." But she could not leave. Not yet. The land was all she had left of her father, the stubborn man who had believed in making something of his own in this hard country. She spent the next 3 days salvaging what she could from the ruins, sleeping in the barn, and avoiding the pitying looks from neighbors who came to pay their respects. They brought food she could not eat and advice she would not take. On the 4th night, she could not bear the silence of the barn anymore. The walls felt too close, the darkness too heavy with memories. She walked out past the paddock, past the creek that ran along the eastern edge of the property, and climbed the gentle rise that overlooked the prairie. Her father used to bring her up here when she was small, before her mother died, before everything became complicated and hard. The sky stretched endless above her, scattered with more stars than anyone could count. She had forgotten how beautiful it was, how vast. For the first time since that terrible night, she felt like she could breathe. She did not hear the footsteps until they were close. "Easy now," a man's voice said, low and careful. "I did not mean to startle you." Beatrice spun around, her hand instinctively reaching for the knife she kept in her pocket. A man stood about 10 feet away, his hands raised slightly to show he meant no harm. Even in the starlight she could make out his tall frame, the cowboy hat pushed back on his head, the gun belt at his hips. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice steadier than she felt. "Name's Quentin Sterling. I work the cattle drive circuit, just passing through. I saw the burned house and wanted to make sure no one needed help." He took a cautious step closer and the starlight caught his face. He was young, maybe mid-20s, with strong features and eyes that seemed genuinely concerned. "Are you all right out here alone?" "I am fine," she said, though they both knew it was not true. Quentin looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, I will leave you be. But I will be camped down by the creek tonight if you need anything. Sometimes it helps knowing someone else is nearby." He turned to go, and Beatrice felt a sudden panic at the thought of being alone again. "Wait," she called out before she could stop herself. "Do you know the stars?" He paused, looking back at her with surprise. "Some. My grandfather taught me when I was a boy." "Could you show me?" The words tumbled out in a rush. "I mean, my father used to point them out, but I have forgotten most of them. I would like to remember." Something shifted in Quentin's expression, a softness that made him look younger. "I would be happy to." He walked back toward her, keeping a respectful distance, and gestured up at the sky. "See those 7 bright stars there making a kind of dipper shape? That is Ursa Major, the Great Bear. And if you follow the line from the 2 stars at the edge of the cup, they point right to the North Star." His voice was gentle, unhurried, like he had all the time in the world. Beatrice followed his pointing finger, finding the patterns he described. "I remember that one. What else?" "Over there, that is Cassiopeia. Looks like a W, the queen who angered the gods with her vanity." He moved slightly closer to point out another constellation. "And that bright one, that is actually Mars. Not a star at all, but a wandering planet." They stood there for nearly an hour while Quentin traced the stories written in the heavens. He told her about Orion the hunter, about the 7 sisters of the Pleiades, about the great swan flying across the Milky Way. His voice was warm and alive, and for those moments, Beatrice could forget the ash and blood that stained her memories. When she shivered in the cool night air, Quentin shrugged off his leather jacket without a word and draped it over her shoulders. It smelled like horses and leather and something else, something clean and masculine. "Thank you," she whispered. "You should not be out here alone," he said quietly. "It is not safe, especially after what happened." "Where else would I go?" The question came out more bitter than she intended. Quentin was silent for a moment. "The camp I mentioned, down by the creek. I am traveling with 2 other drovers, good men. We are heading south tomorrow to pick up a herd in Texas, but for tonight, you would be safer near a fire with people watching." Beatrice knew she should refuse. It was improper, possibly dangerous, but she was so tired of being afraid and alone. "All right." They walked down the hill together, and she realized Quentin was careful to stay at her side rather than behind her where she could not see him. It was a small thing, but it spoke of thoughtfulness. The camp was modest, just a fire and 3 bedrolls laid out at a distance from each other. 2 men looked up as they approached, their hands moving to their weapons before Quentin called out, "It is just me. I brought a guest." The older of the 2 men, grizzled and lean with a scar across his cheek, studied Beatrice with shrewd eyes. "This the girl from the burned-out ranch, Miss Beatrice Henderson," Quentin said. "She will be staying near our fire tonight. Anyone has a problem with that can take it up with me." The younger man, who could not have been more than 20, shook his head quickly. "No problem here. I am James, and that is Claude. Any friend of Quentin's is welcome." Claude grunted but nodded his agreement. "Coffee is still hot if you want some, miss." Beatrice accepted a cup and settled onto a log near the fire, wrapping Quentin's jacket tighter around herself. The coffee was strong and bitter, but it warmed her from the inside out. The men did not pry or ask questions, for which she was grateful. They talked quietly among themselves about cattle prices and trail conditions, normal things that made the world feel less chaotic. Quentin sat down beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "James will take first watch. You can have my bedroll. I will stay up with the fire." "I cannot take your bed," she protested. "You can and you will," he said firmly but kindly. "When was the last time you slept?" Beatrice could not remember. The nights since the raid had been endless stretches of dark terror and grief. She nodded slowly. "Thank you." The bedroll smelled like Quentin, that same clean masculine scent. She lay down facing the fire, watching the flames dance and listening to the quiet murmur of Quentin's voice as he talked with Claude. Despite everything, she felt her eyes growing heavy. She woke sometime before dawn to find Quentin sitting against a tree nearby, his rifle across his lap, keeping watch. Their eyes met in the firelight. "Go back to sleep," he said softly. "You are safe." And somehow, impossibly, she believed him. When true morning came, Beatrice woke to the smell of bacon and coffee. James was cooking breakfast over the fire while Claude checked the horses. Quentin was nowhere to be seen. "He went to look at your property," Claude said, catching her worried glance. "Wanted to see if anything could be salvaged." Beatrice accepted a plate of food and ate mechanically, her mind churning. These men were strangers who owed her nothing. They would leave today, and she would be alone again. The thought filled her with a dread she could barely contain. Quentin returned an hour later, his expression grim. "The main house is a total loss, but the barn is still standing. Some of your father's tools survived, and I found this." He held out a small metal box, charred but intact. Beatrice's breath caught. She knew that box. Her father had kept his important papers in it. With shaking hands, she opened it to find the land deed, slightly singed but still legal. There were also some bills of sale, a few dollars in coin, and a daguerreotype of her mother. "Thank you," she managed, her voice thick with emotion. Quentin crouched down beside her. "Miss Henderson, I need to speak plainly with you. You cannot stay here alone. Those men who came for this land, they will come back when they hear you survived. The deed means nothing if you are not alive to defend it. What choice do I have?" She looked at him with desperate eyes. "This land is all I have left. Come with us," he said, the words seeming to surprise him as much as her. "To Texas. We are picking up a herd for a ranch owner in Nebraska. It is hard work and a long trail, but you would be fed and protected. By the time we reach Nebraska, you will have had time to figure out your next move. Maybe sell the land from a distance through a lawyer, get enough money to start fresh somewhere safe." Claude made a choking sound. "Quentin, are you out of your mind? We cannot bring a woman on a cattle drive." "Why not?" Quentin stood up, his jaw set stubbornly. "She can ride, I assume. Since I was 6, Beatrice said. She can cook. Better than any of you, I would wager." Quentin looked at his partners. "We need a camp cook anyway. Every drive has one. She works for shares of the payment, same as any hired hand. It solves her problem and helps us." James looked uncertain. "What would the trail boss say?" "I am the trail boss," Quentin said quietly. "This is my drive, my rules. Anyone who does not like it can find other work." Beatrice stared at him. "You would do this for me? You do not even know me." Quentin met her eyes, and something passed between them, something electric and profound. "I know enough. You lost everything and you are still standing. That takes strength. And last night, when you asked about the stars, I saw someone who refuses to let this world make them small and bitter. That is rare, worth protecting." Her heart was pounding so hard she thought he might hear it. "I accept." Claude threw up his hands. "This is insanity." "Maybe," Quentin agreed. "But it is happening. Miss Henderson, get whatever you need from your property. We ride out in 2 hours." The next 2 hours passed in a blur. Beatrice gathered what little she could salvage: some clothes, her mother's Bible, a few cooking implements from the barn, and the metal box with the deed. She stood for a long moment looking at the blackened ruins of the house, saying a silent goodbye to her father and the life she had known. She found Quentin checking the cinches on the horses. He had acquired a gentle mare for her, a pretty chestnut with kind eyes. "Her name is Rosie," he said. "She is steady and sure-footed. She will take care of you." Beatrice stroked the mare's soft nose. "I still do not understand why you are doing this." Quentin was quiet for a moment, his hands stilling on the saddle. "5 years ago, my sister was in a situation like yours. Her husband died, left her with nothing. No one helped her. By the time I made it back from a drive to check on her, she had disappeared. I searched for months but never found her. I swore if I ever had the chance to help someone the way I wished someone had helped her, I would take it." "I am sorry," Beatrice said softly. "So am I." He looked at her with those earnest eyes. "But maybe some good can come from it now." They rode out shortly after, heading south toward the Red River and the Texas plains beyond. Beatrice had never been more than 20 miles from Ellsworth in her life. Now she was riding into the unknown with 3 cowboys she had just met, her entire world reduced to what could fit in saddlebags. It should have terrified her. Instead, she felt something like hope. The first days on the trail were hard. Beatrice's body ached from long hours in the saddle, and the work of setting up and breaking down camp was exhausting. But she threw herself into it with determination, refusing to be a burden. She cooked meals over the open fire, mended torn shirts, and learned to read the weather in the clouds. Quentin was patient with her, showing her how to properly pack a bedroll and how to tell if water was safe to drink. He never spoke to her with condescension, always as an equal. Claude remained skeptical but gradually warmed as Beatrice proved her worth. James was friendly from the start, treating her like a kid sister. At night, after the work was done and they sat around the fire, Quentin would often point out the stars again. It became their ritual. He would sit close enough that their shoulders almost touched, his voice low and soothing as he traced the constellations. "You really love the stars," Beatrice observed one night after he had spent 20 minutes explaining the mythology behind Perseus and Andromeda. "My grandfather was a ship's navigator before he came west," Quentin explained. "He used to say the stars were proof that there was order in the chaos, that no matter where you were or how lost you felt, the stars could bring you home. I liked that idea." "Do you feel lost?" she asked. He considered the question. "Sometimes. I have been on the trail since I was 16. I know how to move cattle, how to read the land, how to survive. But sometimes I wonder what I am moving toward, if there is a home at the end of all this wandering." Beatrice understood that feeling more than she could say. Maybe home is not a place, maybe it is people. Quentin looked at her, really looked at her, and smiled. It transformed his face, made him look younger and happier. "Maybe you are right." They reached the Texas Panhandle 3 weeks later and met up with the ranch owner who had hired them. He was a big, boisterous man named McCready who looked startled to see a woman among the crew. "Quentin, what in the Sam Hill is this?" "Our camp cook," Quentin said calmly. "Best biscuits you will ever eat, and she can mend anything." "You got a problem with that?" McCready looked at Beatrice, who stared back at him with her chin raised. He laughed suddenly, a big booming sound. "I like her spirit. All right, Sterling, she is your responsibility. The herd is ready whenever you are. 800 head, bound for Nebraska. I have got 3 more men joining you here." The additional men were experienced drovers, weathered and capable. They accepted Beatrice's presence with varying degrees of surprise but no outright hostility. The rules were simple. She did her job, they did theirs, and everyone stayed professional. The drive north was brutal. Texas sun beat down mercilessly, and the cattle were ornery and prone to spooking. Beatrice learned to sleep through the sound of lowing cattle, and to cook for 8 men with whatever supplies they could carry or hunt. Her hands grew calloused and her face tanned despite the bonnet she wore, but she also grew stronger. The grief that had threatened to swallow her whole began to ease into something more manageable. She could think about her father without feeling like she was drowning. She could laugh at James's terrible jokes and listen to Claude's grumbling with affection. And she could feel the way her heart quickened whenever Quentin was near. He was a natural leader, commanding respect without being harsh. When a young steer got stuck in a ravine, Quentin was the one who climbed down to free it, risking his own safety. When 2 of the drovers got into a dispute over cards, he mediated fairly. And every night, no matter how exhausted he was, he made time to sit with Beatrice and show her the stars. One night, about 6 weeks into the drive, a summer storm rolled in fast and violent. The cattle started to stampede, 800 head of terrified beef thundering across the plains in the dark. All hands scrambled to try to turn them, to keep them from scattering completely. Beatrice had been told to stay with the chuck wagon, but when she saw one of the drovers get thrown from his horse right in the path of the stampede, she did not think. She just acted. She rode Rosie hard toward the fallen man, grabbed his arm and hauled him up behind her, wheeling away just as the cattle surged past. By the time the storm passed and the cattle were finally calmed, it was nearly dawn. Quentin rode back to camp looking wild-eyed and frantic. When he saw Beatrice standing there, muddy and exhausted but alive, he practically fell off his horse. "What were you thinking?" he shouted, grabbing her by the shoulders. "You could have been killed." "So could Tom," she shot back, gesturing to the drover she had saved. "Was I supposed to just watch?" "Yes. No, I do not know." He was shaking, she realized. "Beatrice, if something happened to you, I could not bear it." The camp went silent. Everyone was staring at them. Quentin seemed to realize what he had said. His hands were still on her shoulders, and his face was inches from hers. "I could not bear it," he repeated, quieter now. "Quentin," she whispered. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. She felt his heart pounding against hers, felt the tremor in his strong frame. Her own arms came up to wrap around him, and for a moment the rest of the world disappeared. When they finally pulled apart, Claude was watching them with knowing eyes. "About time," he muttered. The rest of the drive was different. Quentin did not hide his feelings anymore. He stayed close to Beatrice whenever he could, their conversations growing deeper and more personal. She learned about his childhood in Missouri, about the parents he had lost to cholera, about his dreams of having his own ranch someday. He learned about her mother's gentle spirit, her father's stubbornness, her love of reading and her secret dream of seeing the ocean. "I will take you," Quentin said one night as they lay on their backs looking at the stars. The others were asleep, giving them a rare moment of privacy. "When this drive is done and we have our pay, we will go to California, see the Pacific." "That is crazy," Beatrice said, but she was smiling. "Maybe. But I meant what I said during that storm. I cannot bear the thought of losing you. I know this is fast. I know we have only known each other a couple of months, but Beatrice, I am in love with you." She turned her head to look at him. His face was serious in the starlight, vulnerable in a way she had never seen from him. "I love you too," she said simply. Quentin reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "Will you marry me?" "I do not have much to offer right now except a life on the trail and a heart that is completely yours, but I swear I will spend every day trying to make you happy." "Yes," Beatrice said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, absolutely yes." He kissed her then, gentle and sweet and full of promise. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, bearing witness to two souls finding each other in the vastness of the frontier. They were married 3 days later by a traveling preacher they encountered near the Kansas border. Claude and James stood as witnesses, both grinning like fools. The ceremony was simple, just a few words spoken under a cottonwood tree, but it was perfect. That night, Quentin built their camp a little ways from the others, giving them privacy. He was achingly gentle with her, his hands reverent as he helped her out of her dusty clothes. They came together under the stars, whispering promises and declarations, learning each other with wonder and joy. Afterward, Beatrice lay in his arms, her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "I thought my life was over," she said quietly. "That night my father died, I could not imagine a future that was not just pain." Quentin's arms tightened around her. "I am so sorry that happened to you, but I am grateful that it led you to that hill, looking at the stars, the night I found you. So am I." They completed the drive 2 weeks later, delivering the herd to a ranch outside of Omaha, Nebraska. Macready was pleased with their work and paid them handsomely. With her share and the money from selling her father's land through a lawyer Quentin knew in town, Beatrice had more cash than she had ever seen in her life. "What do you want to do?" Quentin asked as they stood in the street of Omaha, watching the city bustle around them. "We could go to California, like I said, or head back to Texas, maybe start our own ranch." Beatrice thought about it. She had loved the drive, loved the freedom of the open trail, but she was also tired. She wanted a home, a place to put down roots. "I want land," she said. "Not in Kansas, too many bad memories, but somewhere we can build something of our own." Quentin smiled. "I know just the place." They traveled to Montana Territory, where land was cheap and the mountains were so beautiful they took her breath away. Quentin used his savings combined with hers to buy 300 acres of prime grazing land in a valley with a clear stream running through it. They spent the rest of the summer and fall of 1875 building a cabin, a barn, and corrals. It was hard work, the hardest Beatrice had ever done, but it was good work. She and Quentin labored side by side, their hands blistered and their backs aching, but they were building something together. Claude and James came to help for a few weeks, along with some neighbors who welcomed the young couple to the area. By the time the first snow fell, they had a snug cabin with a real fireplace, a barn full of hay, and 20 head of cattle. It was not much, but it was theirs. On Christmas Eve, Beatrice stood outside the cabin looking up at the winter sky. The stars were brilliant against the darkness, sharp and clear in the cold air. She could pick out all the constellations Quentin had taught her now. Orion marching across the southern sky, Cassiopeia in her celestial throne, the Big Dipper pointing the way north. The cabin door opened behind her, and Quentin came out wrapped in a heavy coat. "You will freeze out here." "I wanted to see the stars," she said. "Remember them the way they are right now." He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her and pulling her back against his chest. "Why right now?" She placed her hands over his. "Because I am happy. Completely, perfectly happy. And I want to remember this moment forever." Quentin turned her in his arms, his face tender. "There will be a lot more happy moments, I promise you. I know. But this one, this first Christmas in our home with you holding me under the stars you taught me to name, this is special." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "Every moment with you is special." They went back inside where a fire crackled merrily in the hearth. Beatrice had made a simple dinner of venison stew and biscuits, and they ate by candlelight, talking about plans for the spring. They would get more cattle, plant a garden, maybe build a bigger barn. Simple plans, but full of hope. That night, lying in their bed with Quentin's arm around her, Beatrice thought about how far she had come from that desperate girl standing in the ashes of her childhood home. She had been so lost, so certain that her life was over. But then a cowboy had found her gazing at the stars alone and had shown her there was still beauty in the world, still reasons to hope. He had pointed out constellations and held her close, and in doing so, had given her back her life. She fell asleep counting her blessings instead of sheep. The first year was hard but rewarding. They lost some cattle to a harsh winter, but their herd grew despite it. Beatrice planted a garden that flourished in the mountain soil, and she learned to preserve food for the winter months. Quentin proved to be a skilled rancher, and their operation slowly grew. But more than the material success, their love deepened. They learned each other's moods and habits, learned to work together seamlessly. Quentin taught her to shoot and to throw a lasso. She taught him to read beyond simple words, opening up books she had brought from Kansas. In the evenings, they would sit together, her reading aloud while he whittled or mended tack, and every clear night they would step outside and look at the stars together. In the spring of 1877, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant. She told Quentin on a warm May evening, leading him out to their favorite spot by the creek where the stars reflected in the water. "I have something to tell you," she said, taking his hands. He looked worried. "Is everything all right?" "Everything is wonderful. Quentin, we are going to have a baby." The expression on his face was something she would treasure forever. Pure joy, wonder, and a little bit of terror all mixed together. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing, then set her down gently as if she might break. "A baby," he said in wonder. "We are having a baby." "Are you happy?" she asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. Happy does not begin to cover it. He placed his hand on her still flat stomach. "When? Late autumn, I think. October or November." They sat by the creek for hours, making plans and dreaming about the future. Quentin was already planning additions to the cabin, talking about building a cradle. Beatrice felt a deep contentment settle over her. This baby would grow up surrounded by love and mountains and stars, never knowing the kind of loss she had endured. The pregnancy was easier than she had feared. She felt well most of the time, and Quentin was almost comically protective. He would not let her lift anything heavy and insisted she rest every afternoon. Their neighbor, a kind woman named Sarah who had 5 children of her own, came by regularly to check on her and offer advice. In late October, on a clear night with a full moon, Beatrice went into labor. It was long and painful, but Quentin stayed by her side the whole time, holding her hand and murmuring encouragement. Sarah delivered the baby just as dawn was breaking. "It is a boy," Sarah announced, placing the squalling infant in Beatrice's arms. Beatrice looked down at her son, this tiny perfect creature with a shock of dark hair and Quentin's nose, and felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. Quentin knelt beside the bed, his eyes wet with tears as he touched the baby's tiny hand. "He is beautiful," Quentin whispered. "You are amazing. I love you so much." They named him Thomas after Beatrice's father. Thomas Sterling, born October 28, 1877, in a cabin in Montana Territory under a sky full of stars. The years that followed were full and busy. Thomas was a healthy, happy child who started walking early and never seemed to stop moving. In 1879, they had another son, William, who was quieter and more thoughtful. Then in 1881, a daughter they named Clara arrived, with her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn streak. The ranch grew along with their family. Quentin hired a few hands to help with the expanding herd, and they built a larger house to accommodate their growing family. They added horses to their operation, breeding and training them for sale. Beatrice started a small business selling her preserves and baked goods in the nearest town, which was growing into a proper settlement. Money was never plentiful, but they had enough. More importantly, they had each other and the life they had built together. One evening in the summer of 1885, when Thomas was 7, William was 6, and Clara was 4, the whole family went out to watch the stars. It had become a tradition, one the children loved. Quentin would lie on his back with Clara on his chest and the boys on either side, pointing out constellations and telling stories. "See those 7 stars," he said, pointing. "That is the Great Bear, and those 2 on the end, they point to the North Star." "I see it," Thomas shouted. "Me too." William added. Clara just giggled and pointed randomly at the sky, happy to be included. Beatrice sat nearby, watching her family with a full heart. This was everything she had never known to dream of, back when she was a frightened girl standing in the ruins of her old life. Sometimes she still thought about her father, about the family she had lost, and felt the old grief. But it was softer now, tempered by time and surrounded by so much love. Quentin caught her eye and smiled, that same warm smile that had first made her heart skip a beat. He reached out his free hand and she took it, threading their fingers together just like that first night when he had proposed under the stars. "What are you thinking about?" he asked quietly. "How lucky I am," she said simply. "We both are." As the children chattered and pointed at the stars, asking endless questions, Beatrice reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She thought about that night 10 years ago when she had climbed a hill outside Ellsworth, Kansas, drowning in grief and fear. She thought about the cowboy who had found her there and offered kindness when she needed it most. Quentin had given her more than safety or a new life. He had given her hope when she had none. He had shown her the stars when all she could see was darkness. He had loved her when she felt unlovable, had chosen her when she had nothing to offer but her broken heart. And she had loved him back with everything she had, building this beautiful life together one day at a time. In 1888, they had their fourth and final child, another boy they named Samuel. He was a surprise, coming when Clara was already 7 and Beatrice thought her childbearing years were behind her. But he was a welcome surprise, a sweet-natured baby who seemed to smile at everything. By 1890, the ranch was one of the most successful operations in the territory. They had over 1,000 head of cattle, a remuda of fine horses, and a house that had grown from that original cabin into a substantial 2-story home. Thomas, now 12, was already a skilled horseman helping his father with the ranch work. William showed an interest in books and learning that reminded Beatrice of herself. Clara was bright and fearless, insisting on doing everything her brothers did. And Samuel, at 2, was the darling of the family. Quentin was 38 now, his face weathered by sun and wind but still handsome to Beatrice's eyes. She was 34, her hands work roughened but capable. They had both changed so much from the young people who had met on a dark night in Kansas, but their love had only grown stronger. One night after the children were all in bed, Quentin led Beatrice outside. It was late summer, warm and clear, with the Milky Way splashed across the sky like spilled milk. "You remember the first time I showed you the stars?" he asked. "Of course. You told me about Ursa Major and Cassiopeia and Mars. You let me wear your jacket because I was cold." "I knew that night," he said quietly. "Standing there with you, looking at the sky, I knew my life had just changed forever." Beatrice leaned against him. "I was so lost. I thought I would never feel anything but pain again. And then you showed me there was still beauty in the world." "You showed me what I had been searching for," Quentin said. "All those years on the trail, wondering if I would ever find a home. I did not understand that home was not a place I would find. It was a person. It was you." He turned her to face him, his hands framing her face tenderly. "I love you, Beatrice Sterling. I have loved you for 15 years, and I will love you for 15 more and 15 after that, until the stars burn out." "I love you too," she said, tears streaming down her face. "More than I can ever say." They kissed under the stars, the same stars that had witnessed their first conversation, their first declaration of love, the birth of their children, every triumph and struggle of their life together. The stars that would keep turning in their ancient dance long after they were gone, eternal and unchanging. But for now they were here, alive and in love, and surrounded by the life they had built. And that was more than enough. The years continued to pass, marked by the steady rhythm of ranch life and the growing of their children. Thomas grew into a strong young man who took over more of the ranch operations, as Quentin's back began to ache from decades of hard work. William surprised everyone by becoming a teacher, opening a small school in the growing town nearby. Clara married a neighboring rancher's son when she was 20, a good man who loved her fierceness. Samuel showed an aptitude for training horses that exceeded even his father's skill. Beatrice and Quentin became grandparents in 1898, when Clara presented them with a baby girl. Watching Quentin hold his granddaughter with the same tenderness he had shown their own children made Beatrice fall in love with him all over again. They were in their 50s now, their hair graying and their bodies slower than they once were. But they still went out on clear nights to look at the stars together. It was their ritual, the thread that connected them to those first precious moments when they had found each other. On a cool September evening in 1900, 25 years after that fateful night in Kansas, they stood together on the porch of their home. The ranch spread out around them, prosperous and well-run. Their children were grown and happy, starting families and lives of their own. They had built something lasting and good. "You ever regret it?" Beatrice asked, leaning into Quentin's embrace. "Taking a chance on a desperate girl you found on a hill," Quentin laughed softly. "Not for a single second. Best decision I ever made. Even when I was slowing down the cattle drive. Even then. Especially then, because it meant I got to spend more time with you." She turned in his arms to look at his face, this beloved face she knew as well as her own. "Thank you for finding me that night. Thank you for showing me the stars and teaching me to hope again. Thank you for being brave enough to come with me," he replied, "for building this life with me, for loving me." "That was the easy part," Beatrice said. "Loving you has always been the easiest thing in the world." They stood there together as the stars came out one by one, the same stars they had been watching together for a quarter of a century. Orion rising in the east, the Big Dipper wheeling around Polaris, Cassiopeia taking her place in the northern sky. The familiar patterns that had marked every season of their life together. Inside the house, they could hear their grandchildren laughing, staying over for the weekend. Samuel was teaching them a song while Thomas told some tall tale about a cattle drive. The sounds of family, of legacy, of a life well lived. Quentin pointed up at the sky. "See that star there, the bright one? That is Vega, the harp star. I do not think I ever told you about that one." Beatrice smiled. After all these years, he could still surprise her. "Tell me now." So he did, his voice as warm and gentle as it had been that first night, weaving stories out of starlight and wonder. And Beatrice listened, her head on his shoulder, her hand in his, exactly where she belonged. The night deepened around them, full of promise and peace. They had come so far from those first desperate days, had weathered storms and celebrated joys, had built a family and a legacy that would outlast them. But the foundation of it all was this: a cowboy who had found a grieving girl gazing at the stars alone, who had pointed out constellations and held her close, and in doing so, had changed the course of both their lives forever. As the stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance, Beatrice and Quentin stood together, two souls who had found each other in the vastness of the frontier and had chosen each other every day since. They had loved deeply and truly, had built something beautiful out of ashes and hope. And when they finally went inside to join their family, they did so together, hand in hand, their hearts as full as the sky above was full of stars. The love they had found under those stars had carried them through 25 years of joy and sorrow, triumph and struggle. It had given them children and grandchildren, a home and a legacy, but most of all it had given them each other. And in the end, that was everything. The seasons turned as seasons do. Autumn gave way to winter, winter to spring. The ranch continued to thrive under Thomas's capable management. William's school grew, educating a new generation of Montana children. Clara had 3 more children, filling the ranch with the sound of young voices. Samuel married a girl from town and started breeding champion horses that were sought after throughout the territory. Beatrice and Quentin grew older together, their steps slower but their love undiminished. They spent their days helping where they could, spoiling their grandchildren and enjoying the fruits of their decades of hard work. On their 30th anniversary in 1905, their children threw them a party. Friends and neighbors came from miles around to celebrate the couple who had become pillars of their community. There were speeches and toasts, laughter and music. But the moment Beatrice treasured most came late that night, after all the guests had gone home. Quentin took her hand and led her outside, just as he had done countless times before. The stars were brilliant, a crisp autumn night that made them seem close enough to touch. Quentin pulled her close, and they swayed together to music only they could hear. 30 years, he said softly. It feels like both a lifetime and no time at all. I know what you mean, Beatrice replied. Sometimes I feel like that girl on the hill was someone else entirely. Other times it feels like yesterday. Do you know what I think about when I look at the stars now? Quentin asked. What? I think about all the nights we have stood here together, all the moments we have shared under this sky. The night I proposed, the nights our children were born, the quiet nights when it was just us. The stars have witnessed our whole life together. Beatrice felt tears on her cheeks. That is beautiful. It is true. And I hope we have many more nights together, but whenever my time comes, I want you to know that you made my life worth living. You were the home I was searching for. Quentin, do not talk like that. He kissed her forehead. I am not being morbid, just honest. I love you, Beatrice. I have loved you from the moment I saw you on that hill, silhouetted against the stars. I will love you beyond my last breath. I love you too, she whispered, always and forever. They stood there, holding each other under the stars that had brought them together, surrounded by the life they had built and the family that was their legacy. And in that moment, they were not old or tired or worn by years of hard work. They were just Quentin and Beatrice, two souls who had found each other in the darkness and had chosen to walk through life together. The stars shone down on them, eternal witnesses to a love that had endured through everything the frontier could throw at them. A love that had started with a simple act of kindness and had grown into something that would echo through generations. Years later, when Beatrice was very old and her children and grandchildren had children of their own, she would still go out on clear nights to look at the stars. Quentin had passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 72, and she missed him every single day. But she found comfort in the stars, in the patterns he had taught her all those years ago. Her great-grandchildren would sometimes join her, asking about the stars just as she had once asked Quentin. And she would tell them the names of the constellations, the stories behind them, and about the cowboy who had first shown them to her on a dark night when she thought her life was over. She told them about how he had found her gazing at the stars alone, how he had pointed out constellations and held her close, how he had loved her for more than 50 years with a devotion that never wavered. She told them that true love was not just passion and romance, though they had plenty of that. It was choosing each other every day, building something together, weathering storms side by side. And when her time finally came, at the age of 83, surrounded by the family that would not have existed without that chance meeting on a Kansas hill, Beatrice Henderson Sterling closed her eyes for the last time with a smile on her face. She had lived a good life, a full life, a life rich with love and purpose. She had taken the ashes of her first tragedy and built something beautiful from them. She had been brave enough to trust a stranger, to take a chance on love, to build a life in a hard land. And somewhere, she knew, among those eternal stars that had witnessed every moment of their love story, Quentin was waiting for her, waiting to take her hand again, to hold her close, to show her new constellations in whatever lay beyond. The stars would keep turning. The ranch would continue under the care of their descendants. And the story of the cowboy who found a girl gazing at the stars alone would be passed down through generations. A reminder that love can bloom in the darkest moments, that kindness can change the course of a life, and that sometimes the most beautiful things come from the most unexpected meetings. Under the vast Montana sky, under stars that had shone down on countless lives and loves, the legacy of Beatrice and Quentin Sterling endured. Not just in the land they had tamed or the family they had raised, but in the story of how two lost souls had found each other under the stars and had built a love that would outlast them both. And on clear nights, when the stars are bright and the air is still, some say you can still feel their presence on that hill overlooking the ranch. Two spirits standing together, hand in hand, gazing up at the constellations that brought them together and kept them together through all the years of their lives. A cowboy and the woman he loved, eternal as the stars themselves, proof that love, true love, never really ends. It just changes form, living on in the hearts of those who remember, in the stories passed down through generations, in the very stars that witnessed it all, the end of their earthly journey, but the beginning of their eternal one. Together, always together, under the stars that had been there from the very beginning, when a cowboy found a girl gazing at the stars alone and changed both their lives forever with simple kindness, gentle words about constellations, and arms that held her close when she needed it most.